Well, definitely it will make more difficult for Ukrainians to start the counteroffensive. On the other hand, I see that there is the determination from military leadership and from the political leadership of the country not to stop, to move forward, because this is our goal and that's what we must do. So I think that Ukraine will continue the attempts to regain our own territories, and this will not stop us.
Ukraine's President Zelenskyy has accused Russia of an environmental bomb of mass destruction and urged the world to react after the explosion which destroyed a vast dam in Russian-held territory. Thousands of people have been forced to flee the rising floodwaters, and there are reports of Russian shelling as the evacuation efforts continued. Officials say 30 towns and villages along the Dnipro River have been flooded and nearly 2,000 homes have been submerged in the main city of Kerson. Ukraine has blamed Russia for deliberately blowing up the dam to prevent it being used in a counter-offensive. Russia has claimed Kyiv shelled the dam itself. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, condemned the destruction, but said it was too early to say who was responsible.
We don't know definitively the source of the attack. Our military and security services and military services are working through that, so I can't preempt the results of that. But look, Russia throughout this war has used as a deliberate active strategy to target civilian infrastructure. We've seen that. It's been an active strategy on their part. It's caused enormous suffering to the Ukrainian people, and it is wrong. It's barbaric and it's appalling.
Well, a short time ago, I spoke to Iuliia Mendel, who's a journalist and a former press secretary to President Zelenskyy. She has family in the area, and she told me more about what she's been hearing on the scale of the damage around Kherson.
Kherson is my home region, and I have grandparents from the villages there, and my parents stay in Kherson city itself. So it's very difficult right now to estimate the scale of the tragedy that is happening, and the worst thing, it's really very difficult to estimate the consequences which will come later, because the water is taking all facilities, and there can be diseases later, the mines that can blow up the facilities, people who die in occupied territories, or who may die right now because of flooding. But of course, what we see right now, a lot of destruction of people's houses, belongings, people who leave houses, terrified animals, and there is the atmosphere of shock there. I was in touch with my parents. Thank God they are higher on the land and the water didn't come close to their apartment. But my mother has friends who live in Ostriv. Ostriv is translated as an island. It's actually a small island, a part of Kherson city, which is on Dnipro River, and it's fully underwater, like Atlantide.
What have your family been able to tell you about what the conditions are like? I mean, you described areas there which are now completely underwater. Were the authorities able to evacuate most of the people from there, or do you think there has been loss of life?
Yeah, so I was talking actually to the person who has a house and who used to live in Ostriv. This is a 49-year-old financier who works at the pension fund. Her name is Tatiana, and she told me that she went to the house just to evacuate her second dog, her chicken, and the rabbit of her neighbor. And she also brought some food to those people who stayed there, because there are high-rise buildings, and people who live, for instance, on 9th or 10th floor, some of them stayed still there. But they were telling that just when they arrived very early in the morning, they saw already that the water in an hour rised 15 centimeters on their street. And when they came the second time in an hour, the water was half of the waist already. So they say people were being evacuated at that moment. They saw rescuers. They saw people who were on the boats. They saw the buses coming as close as possible. But also the worst situation, to my mind, is in occupied territory, because we see that Putin gave the order to have those people only in 40 hours after the blow up. And I talked to a person who is originally from the occupied town of Aleshki. He sent me a terrible news. I mean, like, he said that he knew two families and they drove there. And it's very difficult to verify and confirm this situation, but I mean, he's from there and he said that they were his neighbors. And we saw today, I was talking to the soldiers and they confirmed to me that Ukrainian military passes the water to the people on the roofs in occupied territory because people are lack of everything and their houses, which are private houses, are fully covered with water.
So what you're saying is that people in the Russian-held territories, and many of them, of course, have been affected by the floods, are just not getting evacuated, not getting the help that people on the Ukrainian side are receiving.
What I understand after talking with the military, that some people try to reach the Ukrainian controlled territory, and definitely Ukrainian authorities, and there are a lot of NGOs and volunteers, they try to help those people, but everybody has in mind that there is a risk that Russian sabotage groups also can try to reach the Ukrainian controlled territories because of this evacuation. I don't think that the scale of this evacuation is huge because people appear to be in absolutely uncontrolled and disastrous situation. But also I want to tell you one more thing that was confirmed to me by many people, including my parents, that Russians did not stop shelling of the right bank that was liberated in November 2022. So it means that people, while they are drowning in the water and their belongings and houses are drowning, at the same time, Russia keeps firing from artillery all the time. And this is very desperate and very dangerous situation in the region.
So the attacks have continued even during the evacuation. Let me ask you, are you convinced that it was Russia that blew up this dam? Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, has said that the British authorities are still assessing the claims and counterclaims on who was responsible.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, and everybody discusses it. The thing is that when I was talking to military and to the experts, they said it's very difficult for Ukrainians to reach that part of occupation where their hydro station was situated. Also, let me just remind you that Ukrainian authorities were warning about this possibility of this terroristic act as early as April 2022, because Russians mind it fully. So I know that there is this saying that Russians do not benefit on one hand because the Crimea may be lack of the water because of this blow up. But on the second hand, I see that there is a very simple explanation. Russians became very active in shelling of all Ukraine, and they activized their combat actions after they understood that Ukrainian counteroffensive is imminent.
The other effect, of course, of the explosion at this dam is that the road that went across the top of it has been wrecked. What do you think this explosion, the widespread flooding and the huge crisis that's unfolding there, what does that mean for Ukraine's attempt to launch this counteroffensive to regain territory from the Russians?
Well, definitely it will make more difficult for Ukrainians to start the counteroffensive. On the other hand, I see that there is the determination from military leadership and from the political leadership of the country not to stop, to move forward, because this is our goal and that's what we must do. So I think that Ukraine will continue the attempts to regain our own territories, and this will not stop us.
Well, that was Iuliia Mendel, former press secretary to President Zelenskyy. She's now a journalist, and she's been talking to members of her family who were caught up in those rising floodwaters.